Hello, everyone. Hope y'all are doing absolutely fantastic. My name is John. Super excited for another lesson today. And so today we're going to be talking about patient improvement. Last lesson we talked about good pieces and when to trade your good piece for a bad piece and vice versa. And so today I'll be talking about patient improvement of the position. And so, when it comes to chess and trying to convert better positions, I think we've all had those experiences, right? Where you're just clearly better, maybe even winning, and you failed to win because you rushed something too quickly, and maybe you sacrificed a piece or something too quickly. You're trying to cash in, and at the end, it just didn't quite work, and you lost your winning advantage, and maybe even lost the game. Right. And so it's so important knowing how to convert games smoothly, whether that be thematically and decisively or patiently. And so a lot of the time, it's actually superior just to play the game more patiently, slowly, and try to slowly outplay your opponents. Not rush anything, right? Improve all of your pieces to the very maximum. Because once you improve all of your pieces, and we kind of talked about this a little bit last lesson with good pieces, right? When you improve all of your pieces to the absolute maximum, you play patiently, gain space slowly, and just slowly put your opponent in a bind. If all of your pieces and pawns and everything are improved to the maximum, it's going to be that much harder for your opponent to defend when the breakthrough actually does come. So pretty simple concept, but I think it's so often very hard to execute, right? Like you look at Karpov games and let's say the Rui Lopez is white, and you're like, wow, it looks so easy to play. And then you try to, slowly improve and build your position. And then you're like, wow, this is actually really hard, right? And so definitely a pretty simple concept with patient improvement and slowly improving your position. But honestly, I think it can be one of the hardest concepts to really execute well. This idea of patient improvement instead of rushing and just doing everything too quickly, right? Because that's easy to do, but sometimes just taking the time just to slowly improve the position, improve all of your pieces, gain space, put all of your opponent's pieces on worse squares, right? That can be a very hard skill to learn. So hopefully this example helps today with that. And so today we're going to be taking another example from Endgame Strategy by Mikhail Shereshevsky. I briefly mentioned this last time on the last lesson about good pieces, but Endgame Strategy by Mikhail Shereshevsky is a book written in the 1980s. It is my all-time favorite chess book. I think it makes Endgame study very fun, actually. Talks a lot, actually, about some middle game strategy and how that can transition into the end game. And so, really love the book. If you want to buy it off eBay, used or whatever, you can buy hardcover, softcover, anything like that. It's a super awesome book. So we're going to take an example from the book today. And so this game is going to be Ready versus Romanovsky. Once again, from the early 1900s. I love these older games. They just really kind of set the framework for modern chess strategy. And so, yeah, so this game here, we have Ready is white. And so just right off the bat, I think it's always a good idea to kind of, evaluate the position before you kind of jump in here. And so, what are the important features of the position? Who do you think is better and why? And so, in this position as white, white does have a pretty significant advantage. Probably clearly better, actually. I would say clearly better, not just slightly better, clearly better for white here. And the reason for that is because this bishop on e4, I think, is clearly better than this dark square bishop on d4, just because I feel like this bishop has a lot more range. Whereas this bishop is kind of a big pawn, kind of stuck behind these two pawns on e5 and c5. Also, this pawn on c5 is definitely backward, right? It can't move because otherwise it just gets captured by anything on c4 that's guarded three times, right? So this pawn is kind of stuck, which is also kind of why this bishop's a bad piece, right? Because this bishop is caught defending this pawn on c5, so they're both kind of just stuck and kind of just playing against each other. So also, white has a decent amount of space on the king side, right? Like this pawn on f5 definitely does a great job cramping the position. I also feel like this rook is a little more active on the c file versus this rook on black's rook on the d file, which doesn't really do much. Also, white's king can advance a little more easily, right? It can come into f3, e4 pretty quickly, whereas black's king's a little bit further away. And part of that is due to the fact that white has more kingside space with this pawn f5, right? Exerts kind of a cramping influence on the pawns, so the king can't come in as quickly. So yeah, I mean, with that, so once again, all the rook, the bishop, the king, they're all better pieces, and so, and then also I think white's pawns are a little bit better, not as many targets, right? So really, white has a a clear advantage here. Just better pieces all around and even slightly better pawns, right? No pawn weaknesses versus black having that weak c5 pawn. So, with this position, it's opposite colored bishops. So, there are definitely some drawish tendencies there that do exist in this position. So, in this position, it's not immediately a tactical crazy skirmish or anything like that. So, patient, slow improvement is crucial here. And so here, we really see Reti start off very strong. He knows that Black has only really one idea here. That's kind of trying to fix the issue with the c5 pawn. Black would love to play bishop c3 in this position. The idea being that it blocks the rook on the c file, rook on c1 from attacking the pawn on c5. And yeah, this just makes the rook on c1 just not as good of a piece, right? Kind of dampens the effect of having that open c file, right? When you can't use it because the bishop's in the way. So in this position, Reti slowly improves his pieces, right? He understands that Black has a good plan, and remember when we talked about creating plans a couple weeks ago. When it comes to creating plans, right? If your opponent has a good plan, try to prevent it, right? If your opponent has a bad plan, try to provoke it, make them do it, right? Make their position worse, right? So here, Black has a good plan of trying to put the bishop on c3 and make the c file less of a benefit for white. So Reti prevents that. Rook c4, very strong move. The rook is very strongly placed here. Prevents bishop to c3 because now just rook takes c5, right? So now the rook can no longer be blocked on the c file. But also there's some really cool ideas of, so this keeps pressure on the c5 pawn, right? But this also has ideas of possibly transferring the rook along the fourth rank, which looks kind of crazy, but you'll actually see how this is really helpful in this game. So here we have king f8 and now king f3, just improving all of the pieces, right? And this comes with a very strong threat of e3, which forces the bishop on d4 to move, followed by rook takes c5, right? Just winning a clean pawn. And so if you can improve your pieces while also maintaining threats, that's incredible, right? So black is forced to defend the c pawn, e3, bishop c3. And so now we can see, I mean, white has clearly improved his position at this point. This rook is very nicely placed on c4, very nice outpost for the rook. It's very active, attacks the c5 square. Once again, can possibly transfer along the fourth rank, maybe exert some influence on the king side, especially if black, you can imagine, maybe puts his king on the d6 square. And then if you bring the rook to h4, suddenly the pawns are all alone on the king side, no defense with with the king that was previously there. So this rook's very well placed. This king has improved. It's gone to the f3 square, and also the pawn on e3 helps control more central squares. So now the d4 square is controlled. So overall, white has already made some pretty strong improvements in the position. And so at this point, white actually has a pretty convincing plan and just a very consistent plan that he's going for here. So Reti's plan at this point is to go bishop d5, which does two things. Number one, it puts pressure on this f7 pawn, which makes it harder for black to bring his king over to d6 because otherwise the f7 pawn would hang. So bishop d5, but that also opens the idea of bringing the rook to h4, right? Now the bishop's out of the way, the rook can come to h4, and also even the king can come to e4. So the idea is bishop to d5, rook to h4, putting pressure right on f7 and h7 with the bishop on d5 and the rook on h4. And then also the idea is to go g4 and possibly try to go like rook h5, h5, right? And apologize, these arrows are a little confusing. But basically, the idea is to do the rook lift and then just start going g4, rook h5, h4, g5, and combine pressure on the h7 pawn and the f7 pawn with the bishop on d5. So very strong, very convincing plan. And so in this position, bishop d5 is actually a totally fine move. But Reti plays this move, and I just want to say this right now, just a little personal thing. This is my all-time favorite move I've ever seen in chess. I love this move. I don't know why this move like had such an impact on me like as I was growing in my chess career. I've showed this game many times to my students, and I just always love this game. It just really had a profound impact in my chess career. And so, while bishop d5 is a totally fine move and very consistent, there's actually a really, small improvement move. It seems small on the surface, but it's so crucial in this game as we see, as we get closer to the end of the game here. And so in this position, he actually plays the move a4, which is just such an awesome move. And so once again, this is my all-time favorite move I've ever seen in a game of chess. I know it looks very simple, but I don't know why it just had such a profound impact on me. But also, I mean, this is my favorite example I've ever shown. And so I love this A4 move so much. And so what does this A4 move do, right? It does two things. Number one, obviously it's taking advantage of the fact that the pawn on b4 is overloaded. It has to protect the bishop on b3. So after a4, there's no time for en passant because just rook takes c3, winning the bishop, right? So a4 does two things. Number one, it gets rid of any possible weakness on the a2 square, right? If you see the pawn back on a2, it's technically a backward pawn, right? I mean, technically it can go to a3, but that it's a target, right, with the pawn on b4 attacking it. So by putting the pawn on a4, right, the pawn is now totally safe. There's no like possible maybe like rook d8, rook d6, rook a6 ideas like trying to gain play on the a2 pawn, because now the a4 pawn is fully protected by the pawn on b3, right, versus being undefended on the a2 square. So that's point number one. But point number two, and this is something I bring up a lot, is this idea of latent potential. This pawn at a4 is two squares closer to promotion, right? It's two squares closer to promotion on the a8 square, right? And I know that might not seem very important because, oh, there's a pawn on a7, right? So how is this pawn on a4 going to promote? So that's honestly a very logical way to think, but I encourage y'all to think a little more outside the box, right? This pawn being two squares away from promotion can be the final straw that breaks black's position. Because if this pawn ever disappears on a7 for whatever reason, which can totally happen, this pawn being two squares closer to promotion could be the deciding factor in really white just taking the win home, right? And the fact that this pawn on a4 coincides with the queening square of a8, which is a light square, and the fact that white has a light squared bishop, I mean, that makes the threat of promoting and the pawn being two squares closer to promotion that much more effective because it's going to be more supported by the light squared bishop, right? The fact that the queening square is the same color as the light squared bishop. So just a really awesome move and just a really like small improving move that on the surface doesn't seem like it would do that much. But this whole idea of patient improvement, right? Not rushing anything, just taking, the opportunity to make small improvements can really change the way you play chess and really just help you, put just a little more pressure on your opponent. And when that little bit of pressure starts adding up over time, as you make more and more active moves, and play thoughtfully and with good plans, like your opponent's position can often just fall apart very quickly. And that's kind of what we see in this game actually with a4. So here we have king e7, bishop d5, continuing with the plan and also preventing the king from going to d6, right? Because then the f7 pawn will hang. So rook c7. The idea is to go king to d6 now that the rook defends the f7 pawn. Rook to h4, continue with the plan, right? H6 defending the pawn, king e4. Very active. White's just improving all of his pieces. He's playing consistently. He's not switching around between different plans. He's like, hey, I know what my plan is. Let's carry it out. I know it's a good plan. Let's go for it. King f6. This is actually a pretty nice idea from black. Basically, the idea is like, hey, I understand that all the play is happening on the king side, right? I understand that white wants to go g4, rook h5, h4, g5. So I'm going to bring my king in to try to counteract that. It's a risky strategy, right? Because sometimes the king can be under fire, right? The fact that all these pawns are coming on the king side can be intimidating, right? And can be a risky strategy to run your king into that, possibly getting checkmated. But at the same time, I mean, what else is black going to do, right? I mean, this bishop's totally out of play. It's not going to prevent anything happening on the king side. This rook is pretty passive. So really the only piece that can try to, try to throw white off is the king, come to f6. So f6, rook h5. Rook d7 and g4. And so here we see black try a really cool idea. And so ultimately this is losing. It's not like it's actually not a bad move. It's actually kind of interesting. White is actually already winning at this point. I mean, if black doesn't do anything, let's say black plays a move like a5, something like a5, just h4 followed by g5 is just pretty decisive right off the bat. G5 just crashing through maybe after a trade of pawns, the rook's coming to h7, just all the pawns are falling pretty much on the king side. Just very active, very easy to play for white, and black just has no counterplay, right? So Romnowski tries a nice move, g6, right? He's like, hey, I'm going to try to get some final form of counterplay here. So he goes g6, rook takes h6, king to g5. And so just a really cool idea, right? So Romnowski, as black, decided to give up the pawn, but in exchange, he's forking the rook on h6 and the pawn on g4, right? So we have rook h7, king takes g4. And this is a really cool moment here. It's actually very easy to think, maybe, oh, why don't I just take the pawn on g6, right? I'm gonna, I took a free pawn because now the rook is pinned to the rook on d7 is, or the pawn on f7 is pinned to the rook on d7, right? And then just promote this pawn, right? That seems totally winning. But f5 is actually checkmate. So you definitely don't want to do this as white if you're ready. So in this position, Reddy actually finds a really cool tactical solution to the problem. And in this position, he plays bishop to e6. And this is just a really cool move. Just so unique, right? Putting pressure on this rook, defending this pawn on f5, right? But it's not quite over. F takes e6. Now, are we going to take the rook? No, we're not, because g takes f5 is also checkmate, because once again, this king does guard the f3 square, so there's nowhere the white king can run, right? So we're not going to take back the rook. We're just going to take the pawn. And this is where it's so crucial that early we had put the pawn on a4, right? So we see this pawn on g6. Obviously, black can't go rook takes rook because after pawn takes, there's no way to prevent promotion. I mean, this pawn's queening. This bishop on c3 is totally out of the game, just blocked in by all these pawns. So after f takes g6, right, the rook has to move. But now after rook takes a7, we see why it's actually so useful that this pawn was on a4, right? That Reddy took the time to put the pawn on a4 just to improve the placement of that pawn and put the pawn 2 squares away from promotion, right? So now this pawn is free to go, right? A5, A6, and just go towards the promotion square. If it was still an A2, right, it could always get en passant, which would really limit White's winning chances. So now this pawn's free to go down the board. And also White has two connected pass pawns on the king side, right, which are very aggressive. And now this bishop on c3 is totally out of play. And these pawns are doubled, so they can't challenge this king on e4, right? They can't go d5 or f5 or anything like that. So all of black's pieces are just totally misplaced. The pawns can't do anything. And now just having this pawn in a4 is really the deciding factor in this game. It's almost like a principle of two weaknesses, right? The idea is, maybe the first weakness is the two connected pass pawns on the king side that white has. That's black's first weakness, right? He has no way to put any pawns in the way to stop it. But the second weakness is on the other side of the board, which is this pawn on a4, right? White making that patient improvement move of a4, right, on the other side of the board. And it's, now black's stretched between trying to defend the pawns on the king side and then the a pawn on the queen side, right? And just cannot defend the promotion of either one, right? So really cool. So the game wraps up pretty quickly here with king g5, g5, or g7, I should say. King h6, trying to put any pressure on this pawn. a5, right? Just being consistent, pushing all the pawns. We have king h7. So this is a useful move. Kind of frees up the rook on d8 a little bit because now the g8 square is guarded by the king. So that promotion square is guarded. But a6, once again, very consistent. Rook d6. This is a good move from Romnowski, a good try. The idea being that, now that the g7 pawn is pressured, now the a6 pawn is pressured. So trying to kind of maybe freeze up this rook a little bit on a7, trying to protect the a6 pawn as well as the g7 pawn. But ultimately doesn't quite work because we bring another pawn into the game, right? We just make full advantage of the two connected pass pawns on the king side. So h4. And so after bishop e1, trying to finally get the bishop in, it's always been a struggle this whole game. We have h7, bishop h4, h6, and sadly the bishop just cannot get into the game quick enough. So now that the pawn is on h6, guarding the g7 pawn, this rook on a7 is now freed up. It doesn't have to defend the g7 pawn anymore, right? And is now threatening just to go to a8, followed by queening on g8. Obviously, black cannot go king takes h6 because g8 queen. So, for example, let's say black tries to go rook. Let's say rook d8, right? Try to guard the g8 square, prevent rook to a8. This ultimately is not sufficient because of just rook to f7. And the idea here is just to go rook to f8, once again resuming the threat of g8. and queening there, but also setting up ideas of just a7. And once the rook comes to f8, right, you can either queen the g8 pawn or you can queen the a8 pawn. Either one, very effective, right? And so in this position, after h6, Romanovsky, as black, decided to resign to ready. And so just a really awesome game. I really love this example of patient improvement. I don't know why this move a4. I just want to share this with y'all. This move a4 just like had such a profound impact in me, growing up and as I was moving through the ranks. And I just love this move a4. Just this idea of latent potential, right? When you make these slow patient improvements to your position, that can sometimes be the final straw for your opponent, right? Just this, once your pieces are improved and your pawns in this case improved to the absolute maximum, it's so hard for your opponent to hold his position, right? Because wouldn't you rather try to cash in when all of your pieces and pawns are great than if they're not as good, right? Because when they're great, they're more active, they control more space, control more squares, the attack is going to be more powerful, right? And so just love this idea of A4, just a really awesome example, I think, of patient improvement and not, rushing anything, right? You don't need sometimes to hurry up. Maybe for down like a bunch of material, maybe you need to rush something and try to go for only forcing moves and checks and all these things, right? But in this example, right, of equal material, bishops of opposite colors, right? You can be slow and improve the position, right? You don't want to try to throw it away too quickly, right? So a4, love this move, love this idea of patient improvement. And so really hope this game helped y'all out. And so just encourage y'all, to take your time, really think, always look for what your opponent wants to do. I think Karpov is a great example of that. I quote Karpov all the time, but he was always more focused on what his opponent was trying to do than what he was trying to do himself. And so just played around what his opponent was trying to do, right? So just encourage y'all, right, to make sure you know what your opponent's trying to do and try to play around that. And yeah, and with that, don't rush anything. Any don't make any turn any wins that should be wins into draws or losses, right? You want to try to cash in those full points, right? So just make sure to play good chess and slowly improve the position. You don't have to rush anything. So once again, my name is John. Hope y'all enjoyed today's lesson and super excited to be doing some more lessons in the future. Hope y'all have a great day.